Well,
Good afternoon and welcome to Praxis Peace Institute's Friday afternoon series on Zoom. I'm Georgia Kelly, the director of Praxis, and today we have the honor of hosting a longtime activist for peace and friend of Praxis Peace Institute, Dennis KUCINICH. Dennis served as the U.S. representative from Ohio's 10th District in Congress for 17 years. He introduced a bill to create a Department of Peace that would focus on de-escalating conflicts and promoting negotiations. He was also a U.S. presidential candidate in 2004 and 2008. He is a recipient of the Gandhi Peace Award and the author of The Division of Light and Power. I interviewed Dennis when that book came out. It is now available on our YouTube channel to watch for free, so please do check out our channel. He also spoke at the Praxis Peace Institute conference in Dubrovnik, Croatia, 2002, and to a sold-out audience of 1,700 people for a program we did in Marin County in 2003. So today we are so excited to welcome you, Dennis. Welcome to the Praxis program.
well, thank you very much, Georgia, and thank you for our friendship, which now goes back over 20 years, and for that invitation many years ago to go to Dubrovnik, where I gave a speech that even today I'm hearing about called Spirit and Stardust. And what it really was about is about the metaphysics of peace, how we are all one, how we're all made of the same stuff. In the Catholic Church, there's a doctrine known as transubstantiation, where spirit descends into matter and sanctifies it, and then matter ascends back to spirit. And that cyclical nature of the connection between the spiritual world and the material world is really the basis for a stand for peace, because this idea that war is inevitable is a misunderstanding of the nature of both the spiritual and the material world. Einstein's theory of relativity really was about the unity of matter, the contemporaneousness of past, present, and future. And spirit is essentially timelessness. It is an energy that is all inclusive, pervades everything, whether people are aware of it or not. It's about consciousness, which flows through everything. And the misunderstanding of the nature of the material world is one of the predicates for war, because we think that there's just power for some and not for all. I'm sorry?
No, someone was not muted. Sorry, Dennis, go ahead.
Okay, so, this idea about power and how one nation has to be more powerful than another is, a result of a misunderstanding of the nature of the material world, where there is abundance for all of us. It's not just power for some and not for others. Power has a resonance that runs through every aspect of our social existence. And for those who try to deny power to one group over another, they don't get it. They don't get that we're here for abundance. And when we come to the idea of a spirit, the power of spirit transcends everything, as we know. It is not the part and parcel of any race, color, creed, any political formulation, any nation. Our connection with spirit is what connects all of us. the Spiritus Mundi, which the poet wrote of, is really something that countenances an energy that goes beyond the zeitgeist or the spirit of the time, which embraces all time. But we must be aware that those energies can channel light or darkness. They can be an energetic force that can be benign or malign. And it's up to us, basically, to determine which of those energies we want to work through us. The Hindu religion speaks of it when they talk about the spirits of creation and the spirits of destruction. We get a chance to say, okay, I'll make a decision as to what's going to work through me. When individuals are leaders and they decide that the spirit of destructiveness will work through them, they can take us into war, and that often happens, and it's often happened throughout the history of the world. And I think there's always a dynamic tension from what I've seen, both in politics and as an observer and as a philosopher. There's a dynamic tension that's going on all the time between creation and destruction, between Shiva and Vishnu, if you will. And we have to decide which of those forces are we're going to channel. Right now, what we're seeing with those who are charged with the responsibility of guiding nations, some of our leaders internationally have decided to be channels of destruction. And unless there's counterbalancing forces, which come about through many different ways, prayer, meditation, consciousness, political action, there's no guarantee that the world that we have is going to continue to exist, and those things that we love in life, the things that we celebrate, life, love, nature, they're not guaranteed to us. It's an ongoing commitment. So my work for peace begins with an understanding of human unity, that we're all one. We're interconnected. We're interdependent. The human genome theory is showing that we're all 99.9% made of the same stuff. And when we understand that, war is really an act of vengeance and hostility towards not only our brothers and sisters, but towards ourselves, because, there's a sense in which anger is aggression directed inward, and we get angry. The other. Well, war is created when there's an evocation of an outgroup, a projection of another, a creation of an enemy. It's all formulaic, and nations can do that with a tremendous ability to control media. And in a heavily mediated society, you can essentially construct an enemy overnight. We have an enemy Monday, an enemy Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We don't make as much steel, cars, ships in the United States as we used to make, but we know how to make enemies, and they become serialized. So, 1 minute, Saddam Hussein's an enemy, another minute, Muammar Gaddafi, another minute, Vladimir Putin, another minute, President Xi of China. And we just keep going on and on. That's not where it started. It goes back. So we have to ask ourselves, what is this about? And there is an instrumentality today in that. It's what Eisenhower warned about, the military-industrial complex. People make money out of it. War, as General Smedley Butler once wrote, is indeed a racket. I've seen it work. Today, about $1 trillion of the U.S. budget annually, about 50% of discretionary spending goes not only for war, but for all the intelligence apparatus that goes to support it. So we have to ask ourselves, is this structure, which is a projection of a thought form, is it any more conducive to the survival of our species? And I would argue very strongly it is not. That what we must insist is that our leaders, that those who we elect, have to have the capacity for for deeper thinking about our purpose, for deeper thinking about who we are. Not that we ought to ask candidates where they stand on an issue. It's almost as if we should begin with asking them where they stand with themselves. Because a turbulent heart, a troubled conscience has a way of reverberating and dissecting into the smallest corners of a nation, and the character of an individual that it was troubled becomes the troubles of a nation at some point. And you can look anywhere around the world and you can see that as almost a truism. So war is not inevitable. Peace should be inevitable, but war is a projection of thought. And it's not just the leaders, oh, it's them. No, it starts with us. This a maxim about let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me. It's true, because when enough of us believe in peace and work for peace, and I know that's Praxis's dedication and the dedication of the people on this call, we create a resonant field. And that unified field has transformative capabilities. So, I don't just work for peace. I believe in it as a metaphysical and a physical fact. And it's not enough to wish for it, it's to embody it. And when any of us embody it, we begin to help to create the transformation of our relationships, of our communities, of our society, of the world. When each one of us chooses the world. So, George, I appreciate being on this call, and I know that there are not just like-minded people, but people who are on the quest to try to figure out how do we make sense of this world? How do we have an impact? And I would suggest you're already having an impact by having that kind of a tacit, implicit commitment to peace in one's own life and extending it outward. My peace, I leave you my peace I give unto you, is what we quote, our spiritual leaders. So I would love to go into a Q&A with any, if you want to talk about anything in particular. I
do.
Have the
I want to start that off with, because I have a few questions that we can begin this with.
Sure.
One of them, quick, because I think it just follows on what you were talking about, is the media stories, the creation of enemies. And what I've been seeing over the past few years, I no longer have a television, but when I did have one, I was watching some programs like Madam Secretary, and there are many of them, that's just an example. They're interesting stories, interesting plots, but what they're doing underneath it all is normalizing the work of the CIA, normalizing the work of the NSA, normalizing our creation of enemies, because there are the bad guys and we're always the good guys. So I'd like you to just comment on how much the media has shaped our thinking around the Russia-Ukraine war, for instance.
Well, our reality, our external reality, is socially created from all of our interactions, and it's also culturally affirmed. When you spend $1 trillion a year on various trappings and material of war machine, that's a big thought. It's a consciousness, and it's picked up and propelled and repeated over and over again by the media. So they're constructing our social reality, and some people don't know anything other than that. You think of how many young people born right after 9/11 are getting inundated with these kind of messages. Not just from the major media, but from the social media. I mean, social media is really anti-social media, if anything. And so there's little wars going on everywhere all the time. And so there is no real way of understanding the machinations that go on nation to nation, or who to believe. You get to a point where you have to kind of trust your own judgment. So what I've seen, what I saw when I was in the United States Congress, and remember, I come at this from a particular point of view. I'm philosophically opposed to war. Now, does that mean that if our country was attacked, that I would not want to defend America? No, that's not a question. It's not even a close question. But what it means is that we need to be aware that some people get into power with the idea of becoming more powerful. You know, getting elected to public office or having someone's candidate get elected to public office never improved anyone. I mean, if you have a hole in one, if one has a hole in one's soul and thinks that if they have a high office, they're going to fill it, or they get powerful and they'll fill it, or they make money and that'll fill the hole in the soul, never happens. But what happens in Washington is people get in these powerful positions and they get involved and absorbed in this game of like an international chess game. And what happens is that, let's take Russia and Ukraine. Since the end of World War II, the United States decided to outmaneuver Russia in a global game, and that Russia, even though they were our allies in World War II and closed ranks with the US and at tremendous cost, the Russian people lost, over 28 million people in World War II. They closed one front against the Germans, and the US came in and completed the war from the other side. But by the end of the war, somebody decided, well, Russia, communism, we can't let this happen. And what happened is, we used the atomic bomb against the Japanese really as a way of not because it was needed for military victory. 7 out of the 8 leading generals testified that it was not needed. As a matter of fact, it was a crime against humanity. And if you then move from Nagasaki and Hiroshima, you move directly into a Cold War. And the seeds of the Cold War were planted right after World War II. And they were aimed at holding Russia in check. So the creation of North Atlantic Treaty Organization, that was one of its purposes. So in the 70s and the 80s, there was a slow policy of trying to establish along Russia's western perimeter a series of countries that would be dedicated to pushing back at what was projected as Russia's attempt to, or Soviet Union's attempt to impress their particular model on a country. When the Iron Curtain fell and all these other countries suddenly had freedom, then there was still, the fear remained that Russia was going to try to come back and take over the whole range of countries in Eastern Europe that had separated from the old Soviet Union or from its influence. So the West exploited that to create a series of what we call color revolutions that strengthened the anti-Russian sentiment, even though Russia had been in some ways demolished by the breakup of the Soviet Union, and to keep this anti-Russia sentiment alive. So let's move to 2013. Ukraine president was given an offer of economic relief, but in order to do that, he had to really separate any kind of affiliation from Russia. And you have to keep in mind that in Ukraine, the eastern part of Ukraine, the Donbass, was primarily Russian-speaking. So there was a natural connection between Ukrainian leadership and Russia because you had, 10 million and more people living in the Donbass. So the U.S. created conditions for Ukraine to be able to have aid. And one was it severed relations of any kind with Russia and would essentially tilt back towards the West instead of working with the West and Russia. And when the Ukrainian president refused to do that, and basically said, look, you want me to cut ties, but you won't even let our people be able to work visa-free in Europe. So he said no. He was overthrown, no question about it, by the United States government. And in that, the Maidan revolution was brought about through a coup engineered with the help of America, where we actually hired people who instigated a revolt, shooting at both sides. And there were horrific casualties. And that set the stage for a government to be brought in by the United States to govern Ukraine, separate itself from Russia in any way. But that government was given military assistance that then was used to attack the Russians who lived in East Ukraine. And at least 14,000 of those died during the period from 2014 to 2000. Hold on, please.
I think you got from it.
Yeah, can you see me now?
Yes, yes.
From 2014 to about 2022. And Russia's constitution requires it to defend people who happen to be, Russian as a large bloc in eastern Ukraine if they're under attack. So it was predictable that the accelerated attack that was paid for by the West would draw Russia in. Now, I'm not in any way defending Russia's full-scale movement into Ukraine, but one must be aware that the West, United States and NATO, doesn't have clean hands in this. And the thing that I find heartbreaking is that the flower of Ukrainian youth, it's young men and in some cases young women, are getting slaughtered as pawns in a geopolitical game. Totally unnecessary. There was an agreement in Minsk that could have solved all of these issues. The United States didn't want it. The US is holding up any kind of a peace agreement in Ukraine and continues to do it. They just want to keep the war going because this is about degrading Russia. It's not about helping Ukraine. So the more they can degrade Russia, as far as the US is concerned, the better, except for one thing. The sanctions actually backfired and Russia was able to find other markets for its oil. And the blowing up of the pipeline, I mean, there's this game where the US is denying any kind of connection whatsoever. I mean, if you are an unbiased observer and you read Seymour Hersh's report on Nord Stream, you'll see that there is no way in this world that the US had nothing to do with it. It's not even possible. And I'm not into fractured fairy tales when it comes to international relations. So, I look at this from the standpoint of what kind of conduct do we need in order to stop the world from blowing up? Because this practice in Ukraine of making Ukrainian people just a chessboard where we move these pawns around and they end up being dead Ukrainians, that we're going to fight Russia and Ukraine to the last Ukrainian. This is totally immoral. Russia should stop. We could have done that with the Minsk agreement. The US doesn't want to stop it. So what's happening? Hey, Britain is sending in depleted uranium munitions. Russia said, look, those munitions were used in places in the Middle East and in Serbia. They cause cancer, birth defects, and you're not going to do this. And so we're really in a very dangerous place right now, which could be a nuclear war. And so, this world is not guaranteed to us. It is not guaranteed. And when you have individuals who are impressed with their own sense of power and don't think of the consequences of a misstep or, a mishap, we're right now dancing, and there's whistling through the graveyards of empires with this kind of conduct, and frankly, I find it abhorrent. And for my part, I've written about it on Substack. I'm speaking out every chance I get, and I find that we are at great risk. We have driven Russia and China together, which was unthinkable generations ago, but we've accomplished that. We have accomplished alliances around the country that have set the stage for the decline of our dollar. The war in Ukraine has cost anywhere, depending who you talk to, 140 to 151 billion dollars. We're blowing up bridges all over there, and we're looking for money to build bridges in the States. It's madness. We have people begging for food at freeway entrances all over this country, begging for money to just be able to have a roof over their head. We have housing problems everywhere. Then money on blowing up things. So I'm very strongly supportive of trying to end this, but it's really up to the U.S. We're stopping Zelensky from being able to end it. We're telling him, we're calling the shots on what to do. And I think it's also, there's a political basis for it, and I'll wrap this up. The political basis is this: keep the war going through the election. So don't change horses in the middle of the stream. I'll tell you, that whole group that's in the White House right now, I know Joe Biden, I've known him since 1972, but he's not making the decisions anymore. They're being made with people, names of Blinken and Sullivan and Newland, and they're setting us on a path towards destruction. So, yeah, I continue to stand for peace.
Thank you.
Let's.
Yeah, there's just one other part of this, and then I want to open it up to everybody. A lot of our propaganda is saying, well, Russia's trying to take back all of Eastern Europe that they lost. And when I looked this up, I find that, of course, the US has 800 military bases in foreign countries all over the world, and that's in addition to NATO. And I thought, well, I wonder how many foreign bases Russia has. They have 30, as opposed to our 800. So it's like, how much more could we do than they could do? And the other part is, and that just to confirm what you're saying, is today I just read that the US is to begin training Ukrainian forces on the use of the Abrams tanks in May. So this is looking at a long trajectory, like you're saying, through the election, to keep this war going. And it's a proxy war, in my opinion. So the Ukraine suffers for all of this while these chess pieces are being moved around. And I'd like you to just comment a little bit more on the training and the future planning that's already in process to maintain the war.
This is why the war's going to end, because look, depleted uranium munitions, which could bring about World War III, special operations, special forces are in Ukraine right now. We're training people how to use the Abrams tanks, but let me just tell you, any fair reporting, and there's very few of it, fair reports that come out of Ukraine, will have to admit that all that's going to happen is there's going to be a lot more dead Ukrainians. The losses of Ukrainians versus Russians are like 8-1. This is heartbreaking. It's cruel. And I'm not for Russia. I'm not for Ukraine. I'm for the human race. What a thought. And America right now is pursuing a deeply cynical path. And we're doing it in the name of freedom, right? I'm done with that kind of thinking. And we all should be. It's done under the most cynical type of pretense. And the media, what do they know? There's just repeating whatever they're told by the government. There's very few independent reporters anymore. Seymour Hersh is one of them. But, and then we're expected to just go along with anything we're told. Well, excuse me, I served 16 years in the United States Congress. I led the effort against the Iraq War. I knew they were lying. I said so before it happened. And I understood. I did the analysis that showed Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. Al-Qaeda's role in 9/11. Iraq didn't have the intention or capability of attacking the United States. Where were the weapons of mass destruction, right? So, I knew this before we went to war. I told members of Congress, but there was this drumbeat. And there was this enemy, Saddam Hussein. $5 to $6 trillion was blown just, in a war against Iraq and Afghanistan, another war that didn't have to be fought. And we're just keeping it going. It's all about feeding a very corrupt system where the defense contractors own the government. We have to realize, we think, well, this is in other countries. No, it is in our country right now. And I didn't buy it then. I'm not buying it now. It's a racket. It's a crooked racket. And in a just world, all these people be in jail who are the architects of this.
Well put. I'm going to open it up now for questions and for discussion with everyone here. So if you have a question, if you know how to put your hand up automatically, do that, because that's going to be hard for me to see everybody's physical hand put up. So let me know when you're ready. I'm looking. And I think in the meantime, the media, I don't think I'll ever get over the Judith Miller story on page 1 of the New York Times. That was a drumbeat for war, trying to convince everybody that Saddam Hussein did have weapons of mass destruction, that we needed to go to war. And to me, that particular article has become something I think of every time I read articles that are biased, that should be on the opinion pages, but instead they're on the front page of a newspaper. So,
I knew, and I know Judy Miller, a lovely person. She was writing for her editors. Her editors were committed to this war. How do I know that? Because when I was running for president in 2004, in that campaign, which was a very long campaign, it started in Iowa in February of 2003 and just went straight through to the convention in 2004 in Boston. When I was running in that campaign, one of the first meetings I had was in the fabled Oak Room of the New York Times, where I met with editors. And even though I had cited chapter and verse of why the war was wrong, they looked at me as, still a not quite yet a senior congressman. They looked at me like, what does this guy know? And they told me, hey, what do you know? We've got all these reports and we know we're the New York Times. And the arrogance was shocking. And they were all wrong. They're 100% wrong. And they were basically licensing Judy Miller to go ahead and do that reporting because that's what they wanted. There was an agenda to get Hussein, and it was a geopolitical agenda. And it was sick then, it's sick now. This world is tortured by this. And what about the people of Iraq? We must never forget that 1 million innocent Iraqis, men and women and families who had dreams and hopes, who were no different than any of us on this call, who were bonded by those primal human sympathies that connect us each to one another in a way that is deeply human, where we feel all those emotions. We're connected to family. We spend, all decades painstakingly knitting a fabric of familial and social relations, and we just blew it up. We destroyed hundreds of thousands of families. What gave us the right to do that? Why is there no justice on behalf of the people who made that decision to take us there? It's really instructive when you consider that those who have led the United States feel that, it's our right. That's sociopathic conduct. It's psychopathic conduct. And in a just world, people like that, maybe they would be put in a hospital for the criminally insane because they kill people with abandon and don't feel anything. I cannot tell you how many days after I went to the floor of the House of Representatives, I gave over 341 speeches in Congress against the war in Iraq, calling for us to stop it, to get out, offering peace plans, on and on and on. I could feel every time there were people dying. I could feel it. I gave about 150 some speeches to try to warn against the war with Iran, because they were going to use nuclear weapons to bomb Iran's nuclear reactors, nuclear bunker busters, which would have set off radiation throughout the region and the world. And, I felt it. Those were our children. Those were our brothers and sisters. Those were our husbands and wives who were destroyed by lies told by American leaders. And now we face the destruction of the entire world by the same kind of thinking, and in some cases by the same people. No one can tell me anything about this. And I don't say that in any way egocentric way. I don't pretend that I know anything more than anyone else. But I will tell you, I could share you my experience. And I was there for 16 years. And I saw how day after day, lie upon lie, led us into one conflict after another, one war after another, the slaughter of innocents. And then we just walk away and wash our hands and leave the carnage behind us. And it's past the biscuits, please. No. That's not the kind of world that I think needs to be left unchallenged. So I will continue to challenge it and say things. And, some people don't want to hear it. But what I'm speaking is the unvarnished truth.
I wanted to ask you, do you think China is in any position to try to broker a peace between Ukraine and Russia, or would the US just mess that up?
You have to look at what's happening with the US and China. I mean, we are playing with Taiwan only to kind of keep China in a position where, we're playing in a flash of World War III with China over Taiwan. China's not going to let Taiwan become another Ukraine. China has the largest navy in the world, largest coast guard in the world. China doesn't have as many as nuclear missiles by any means as Russia, but they have a sufficient number to create a lot of damage to anybody who would attack what they consider to be a proprietary interest. There are some in Washington who are already saying that we have to prepare for war with China in 2 or 3 years. We're talking about people who, the minute they say that, they ought to be kicked.
So we just lost. Okay, we just lost that, Dennis.
Yeah, what I'm saying is that people who do that, who say that, ought to be, they should not be in government. Yet they're right. Let's go to some questions, George. I've got about
I'm trying
10
to,
more
but
minutes.
nobody's putting their hand up. I keep looking.
Well, let's do this.
Okay, here we got. No, Dennis, we've got one. David Corton.
Hey, Dave, how are you?
Dennis, fine. It's been a long time.
I still read,
Pardon?
I still read what you write. You're great.
Thank you. The patterns that you describe are not that new. We've been in this kind of conflict for thousands of years, which in so many ways is wholly contrary to our real nature and certainly contrary to our well-being. So that's not a new message. Now, there's so much truth to what you spell out, and yet I'm trying to figure out what you want us to take home with us. Where is the source of hope or possibility that gives us a reason to try to endure and try to bring change?
Look, it's not about that, externally. It has to come internally. It has to come from a heart fortified with a sense of peace, a heart that rejects the imprecations of a society that tries to get us into this dialectic of conflict. In Heinrich Ibsen's play, The Enemy of the People, Dr. Stockman discovers that the Towns baths, the springs that people go to be cured and go into the water to be cured, he discovered that they were polluted. And he thought that everybody would be so excited for him to that everyone would be so excited for him to expose this. Well, it was different. They hated him for it because this was the way they made money. So he became, in Ibsen's word, the enemy of the people. And at one point in the denouement of the play, Stockman condemns the pestiferous soil of his society. The pestiferous soil of our society is the military-industrial complex, and it is a source of a lot of income for people. Some, at every level of society, and for some, it's a source of tremendous amounts of money. And they have enormous influence over the government, and they just keep wars going, no matter how we suffer here at home. We don't even think of the connection between the violence writ abroad and what happens at home. You cannot spend trillions of dollars abroad waging war against people who are just like us and not expect in some way, shape, or form it's going to come back to America in the shape of mass violence and shootings and all that other stuff. So what do we do, David? And you raised, that is really the question. It's an existential question. Dylan Thomas would say, rage against the dying of the light. Well, yeah, I can do that, but it's also, there's political questions that come into play. And anybody that supports these wars ought to be thrown out of office. I don't care what party they are. And there really needs to be a clean sweep in Congress and everything else, because they're all voting for it. People who, Democrats didn't vote for war and funding war, because you vote to fund the war, you can't say you're opposed to a war. Please stop it. Really. You have congressmen who are voting for war. Don't let them tell you they oppose the war. Don't even just say stop it. Don't tell me that you voted to fund it. That is the bottom line of cut off the funds. There's no war. So what do you do? What do we do? I think we look for paths to speak out. I think we have teach-ins about what's happening and start to inform people. We use the social media the social as opposed to anti-social media to communicate with groups and say, hey, here's what's really going on. David, you've written incredible books about economics and the control that corporations have over our system. Well, this is a product of it. This is the next generation where it becomes so destructive that it can destroy the world. So this is really about seeking a new form of democratization that comes from the deconstruction of these organizations that have captured regulatory agencies and Congress and have basically set up a form of welfare for themselves ad infinitum. We really are at a pivot point in American history. And either we take control of this country back, and soon, or we're going to lose not just a country, we could lose the world. And this is not an exaggeration. I am not a Cassandra who has always run through the streets. I'm not Chicken Little saying the sky is falling. What I'm saying is we're in danger of World War III here, and it could be a nuclear war, and we'd all, we're all gone. And those of us who would survive, wouldn't have much of an interest in talking about life. So, contact your congressmen, your senators, and all that. But we have to have a different kind of discussion in 23 and 24 about where the country is going forward. What is our role in the world? How do we reconnect?
Can you help us with that discussion?
Sorry.
The things I've learned in my life is that there's much to be against, and we're in deep trouble, no question about that. But I've also realized that simply speaking about what's the failure doesn't get you to a solution.
Well, the problem solution analysis, David, in some ways has trapped us, because the whole scientific method, think of a problem, think of a solution, select the best solution, test and retest. You start with a problem, you come up with a solution, you end up with another. We need a new kind of thinking. And the first thing you have to do is describe where we're at. And that's what I'm doing. What do I envision? I envision a world as one. Do I think it's still possible? Yes. And it's like we have to realize what we already have. We don't have to construct something new. Human unity is a fact of life. The United States is crippled by a type of thinking which says that we're separate. And so we have to start demanding that our leaders change their thinking. We already are equipped to do that. We don't have to invent the world anew. And while I deeply respect what you just offered in terms of, okay, tell us what we do. At this point, the solution is social and it is political. And frankly, we can't look at this point. Washington is not going to offer any path away from this. Every major movement that ever started in this country began in the streets. We're talking about women's rights, civil rights, environment, Earth Day tomorrow. It all started in the streets, did not start in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is not just the capital of America, it is the capital of resistance. And we, the people, have to start organizing and being heard from to reclaim our power, our ability to be able to stand up and speak out. It's fundamental. It sounds simplistic, but it is not. It's really a matter of reclaiming the essence of who we are as human beings. It's really about being human again and not saying, well, this is what the government said. The hell with what the government says. Our government is corrupt from top to bottom right now because it stands for its principal job is not to care for the people of this country. It's to conduct war. And every empire that's ever done that has fallen apart. And we're getting right in line for the next fall. And we can still change it, but it involves people going to the streets. I used to see people out in street corners in places like Washington and New Mexico and other places when I was campaigning. The whole peace movement fell apart because it became partisan. And the Democrats have totally blown any opportunity to have any credibility on these issues by voting to continue funding. So I don't care about party. I care about the country and the world. And I care about all of us, wherever we are. And Praxis is like one of the great organizations that can do this, to start talking about peace being visible. We almost become visible in our statements for peace. And it's really easy to describe it. We don't want World War III. We don't want this escalation. We want to stop it and find a path to end the conflicts. And we can do that. It takes an act of will, just like an act of will led us to it. But this goes beyond will. It's about the human heart. It's about what connects us to people all over the world. And it's those kind of humble reflections that President Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev had to reach a consideration. What about the children? What about future generations? What are we doing here? And that was really at the heart of them backing off, not just removing missiles from Cuba and Turkey. It was a whole different kind of connection. And we're talking about ultimately the science of human relations. And, I really appreciate, Georgia, you inviting me to just share some thoughts with Praxis. And David, which I hope to see you sometime on the road out there. I miss all of you. Love to all of you. It's like faith and good works. Okay, there's good works that need to be done on behalf of peace now. And every one of you has been out there and doing this work for years. You are more important than ever. You have blessed this country and the world with the fact that you have the capacity to think of peace, to act peacefully, to act in the interest of peace, to have a peace consciousness that permeates your life. Oh my God, does the world need that right now? In Praxis, and all of you on this call are more needed than ever. Be heard, take a stand, if only in this silence of your own heart, and let us continue in whatever capacity we may have to do what we can to bring light to a tortured world. So thanks to each.
Can I do one last question from someone or you? Yeah. And I wanted to just mention one thing, Dennis, that has been hard for me. And I think a lot of people who have a broad view of this war between Russia and Ukraine, that there's a division in the progressive movement between how we see this. I mean, there's a part that demonizes Putin and won't see the problems from our side or won't see the bigger picture. And how we talk to them, I mean, that's something I'm wanting to do in teach-ins. How we talk to them is important. And that's what I'm up against. How, because sometimes they don't want to listen. They didn't come to this program today for that reason. So
Start with this question.
pardon?
Start with this question.
Okay.
Who is my enemy? I'll leave you to think about that. Leave all of you to think about that. Who is my enemy?
Yeah.
You know, our enemies begin as projections of our own negative thinking. We can find them everywhere, but usually we're looking in the mirror. I appreciate being here, George. I have to go right now. I think it's an invitation, and I look forward to being able to visit with Praxis again. There's something about working with Praxis that has always enabled me to be able to come into resonance with some thinking that is a reflection of what Praxis is about. So thank you, and let's continue our efforts, okay?
We will, and I will send you the link to this tonight, Dennis, to the
Thank you.
recording. Thank you so much. We'll continue the discussion.
Love you.
Love you
Bye-bye.
too, Dennis. Thank you.
Bye.
So I know, Linda, you wanted to bring up something, so I'm looking at you. You want to unmute?
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, I wanted to, I mean, you kind of asked it, but I'll ask it a slightly different way. I was listening to the guy that, oh God, I can't remember. He wrote the book about we're losing our democracy. And he was so clear last night that Ukraine is our last ditch before we're going to lose our democracy, before the world's going to move towards autocracy. And we absolutely have to, support them. And, I mean, I love the guy's writings. He was very clear. I love what Dennis said, but unless there are people in Russia who are also going to change the consciousness of people, Putin, basically, then we also run the risk of starting World War III. Because if we just say, okay, no problem. I mean, I recognize we can try to do negotiations, but, they haven't worked. I don't understand how we get the enemy to also change their consciousness. I guess that would have been my question.
And I think he probably would ask the question that he just ended with, who is our enemy? And why do we see it that way? We see it that way because it's been sold to us that way. And I think what he was talking about is getting into a broader understanding of this situation, not looking at Putin as an enemy, but looking at the whole picture historically, geographically, geopolitically, what has been going on that's led to this place. How do we get to a negotiated peace? The US is refusing to see that a peace negotiation would be important here. We continue to escalate the war in support of Ukraine. And as long as we're doing that, we're not asking for negotiations. So we have to look at, we're a major player in this war. We can't pretend we aren't.
So if we were in the streets, then we would be asking, we would be demanding that our politicians enter negotiations. I mean, because we can't
That's
just.
exactly right. That's exactly right. We don't demonize anybody. We just say, we want negotiations for this to end this war now. Just like the letter that some of the progressives in Congress put forth and immediately walked back as soon as they got reprimanded for it. But this is what we need. We need to be for negotiations. That's where peace comes out of, not demonizing Putin. I think Dennis would say the same thing. I know Mike wanted to say something. So Mike.
No, thanks. No, I need to.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just needed you by accident. Mike, can you
Very
unmute?
passionate. I mean, he's so passionate. Again, what the other gentleman was saying, where are the answers? What are we doing? You're talking about going out in the streets like they did in Vietnam. But, and he said everybody who's for the war, they ought to be kicked right out of office right now. So if you kick out 80 or 90% of the Democrats, then where the hell are we? So, I mean, I don't really get that. Can't just kick everybody out of office. But the other thing was a very specific question that I think you can answer. And but I didn't have a chance to really get it in. He was talking a lot and I wanted to ask him, but I'm going to ask you. When you talk about Ukraine and what happened back in 2014, okay, this is kind of specific. What exactly what is the charge that the Ukrainians were doing to the Russians that lived there? Which caused all this to happen? You know, wasn't that like a turning? What was it exactly that is the charge that went on there? Were they killing them? What exactly were they doing to cause Russia to react so violently?
There was a coup in 2014 and the US supported it. And it threw out the president of Ukraine, who was elected, because he refused to sever ties with Russia. And so he was overthrown and the US backed that coup. So that's where a lot of this started and a lot of the animosity started. And it's just been kind of incrementally getting worse every year. Does anyone want to add to that? Because probably other people know more about this than I do. So does anyone want to say anything more about the coup and about what happened as a result of it? Nobody wants to? Well, we got some.
What happened to Ray? Ray always had intelligent comments about everything.
Yeah, where are you, Ray?
I haven't heard him in a long time. I'm sorry, but
Yeah, I saw Stephanie waving her hand, so.
Oh, okay, Stephanie, she knows a lot about this. Stephanie, go ahead.
I think you summarized it quite well. It just that it started before there was a coup. It started over Yanukovych was going to they were talking about ties to Europe and versus Russia. And he decided that Russia gave him a better deal economically. So he was going with a partnership with Russia. And that's what caused the protests to start because of the hatred of Russia. There's a tremendous legacy of hatred in Ukraine. I mean, it's all out hatred. It's a lot of the kind of things we think about Putin. They think about Russia. They just hate Russia. And it goes all the way back to the Second World War, actually. I mean, it goes back to Stalin and you know, the starvation that Stalin laid on Ukraine and, you know, all this stuff. And it's just a bitter taste in their mouths. So besides, they want to be part of Europe. The West wants to be part of Europe, the Western part of Ukraine. So that combination was why they were rioting peacefully to begin with. And then it gets complicated because the neo-Nazis came in and they weren't peaceful. And so then it started to get violent and so forth. And anyway, that's the only piece that I would add, Georgia.
Yeah, and you've written some really good articles about this that I can probably circulate with people. There's a lot coming out of the thinking today. Does someone else want to either speak to that or some other part of what might the solutions be going forward? And I think, you know, just kicking people out of office, Mike, I don't think he meant that you just throw everybody out and you have nobody in, that you vote them out and vote other people in. I think, you know, that's what he really meant. Comments from people.
Well, one of the things that, you know, I kept thinking about was the, you know, kind of the propaganda angle that kind of gets everybody focused on, you know, the enemy. And I'm reminded of Sam Keen's book, Faces of the Enemy, where, you know, psychologically, it's so important to demonize people, quite literally, you know, turn them into, you know, images of rats or whatever to show that they are not human and are suitable for being killed. So that's the kind of psychological driver, I think, that's underpinning all of this, and just the sifting of with I'm reminded of the some of the early reporting in the Iraq War, where with the dissolution of the government there, people started to break into storage facilities and were were stealing things like, 55-gallon drums that just happened to be, contaminated with, yellow cake uranium, things like that. And they would empty them, roll them out, and they'd use them to like store milk in and then get contaminated with radiation. That story disappeared. I remember it distinctly. But that kind of thing, the effects of depleted uranium, which he's talking about now, manifesting in Ukraine. Those are horrific, but the stories just kind of disappear. You remember the issue with the the atomic monitoring folks, and there was a bit of a rebellion in that group. Well, that information disappeared too. So when we find, kind of the inconvenient counterpoint to propaganda, it doesn't seem to last very long. So I think that's part of the awareness that I would have. And politically, I was thinking that one of the shifts would be to say, okay, you've got this massive military industrial complex, and politics is about both obfuscation and euphemisms. Well, let's just relabel things. Let's have a national security healthcare apparatus that's funded through the military industrial complex, so that all of our young people will be healthy and ready for the next battle. There's a lot of things I think we could do politically that would kind of shift focus and undermine the current flow of things. So that's my take on it.
Good. So let's hear from someone else. I'm looking around. Some people have left, but okay, Jerry.
Yeah, I found this particular session kind of frustrating. I thought David Corton kind of tried to get Dennis to say something a little more specific that could provide some direction for action, and that never materialized. And I don't know, it seemed like Dennis was just, he's incredibly articulate and no question really heartfelt, but I just don't feel like I got, we all basically agree with his fundamental position on things, and the interconnectedness of all things. That's a basic Buddhist principle as well, but I just don't feel like I got much of any real value, honestly, from this.
You mean looking for solutions for
Or
what?
anything. It's nice to get together with like-minded people and, have your basic values reinforced. But I was hoping for something a little more than that.
And let me just know, what exactly were you looking for, Jerry?
I don't know. I don't have I guess maybe some form of action that we could take, if we're going to go out in this, we need a
Organization.
a comprehensive restructuring of our entire society, and I agree with that. But it's just, what's the next step?
I think we're all a little bit stymied by that too.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and I don't know that anyone has the answer. This is the hard part. It's like, how do we get from where we are, which is understanding the problem, to doing something about it? And I'm going to go back to where we were a few minutes ago, is that everyone doesn't understand this problem the way we're talking about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the first problem. We have a huge population in this country who sees us completely in the right in this situation. We are the good guys. We're supporting Ukraine. We're the good guys. This is what people believe in the US. This is why teach-ins are so important, or some way to get this message out, because it's not going out through the media. It's not going out through social media. we are a small group of people who see it this way. And we have to become a much larger group to get anything accomplished in the streets or anywhere else. So that's, to me, the frustrating part is we are a real minority that sees
Yeah, I
this
agree with
problem in
that.
a holistic way. So I think our first thing is to get more people and to understand this so that we can do something as a group. Right now, even that group in Congress was cowed by that milquetoast letter they had calling for, and they pulled it all back. So we're we're in a hard place. I'm going to go back to David first and then Linda. David?
I'm very interested in your comments, Jerry, because I think we all agree that we've got to grow, but I think our reality, Georgia, is that the group is shrinking. And I was feeling during that presentation with Dennis, who is one of the persons I have most admired in my life. But I, just like Jerry, I couldn't get anything out of this particular presentation other than, wow, things are even a whole lot worse than I thought they were. And that doesn't help. And it made me want to leave, just kind of get out of here and go do something else. And I say that because I think we've gotten to a point here where we need to face that reality that we're a shrinking group. And what is the discussion that would bring people back into engagement? I mean, that I think is a question that maybe we need to use these last few minutes to at least begin to address.
Good idea. Do you have more you want to say about that, David, before I go to Linda?
No, thank you. Let's confront the issue.
Okay, I hope everyone who's still on this call will stay on because I think we're getting to some really important things here. So Linda, I'm going to you next.
Yeah, I mean, I felt very much like Jerry did and Dave. I think we're dealing with too many critical issues at one time. I mean, for the mass of citizens in the US to really get it. I mean, I've been a climate activist for how many years? And we're now finally beginning to wake up to that. And that's a critical issue. But I think in some ways, this issue of World War III or nuclear war, in some ways, is an even larger one. And how on earth do you get people, to see the intercomplexities of these issues enough to want to take to the streets? Because I mean, we saw that all the protests in Vietnam, not to go to Vietnam and not to go to Iraq, it didn't work. So we finally get that there's so much hierarchical power over us as citizens who are concerned. It's really difficult. I mean, we may have changed our consciousness, but our politicians, when we're basically being governed by the military-industrial complex, what do we do? So I don't really have an answer other than, yes, it's a complete change of consciousness. We should probably all be in dialogue groups talking about how we can not permit these existential issues to go further. But, people are busy and they worry about the gas prices going up. They worry about what they're going to eat for dinner. They do not worry about these larger issues.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Stephanie?
People don't like to be lectured, and he was kind of ranting a lot of the time, but there is a place for telling the truth. And he was really baldly telling the truth. And I think that's a first step, is to, hear the truth, recognize the truth, and then stay with how you feel about the way the truth is. So I just wanted to say that I think there's a place for what he was doing. And we can go from there. I mean, his answer was, it's in your heart, which is true. If you suddenly feel like, wow, they're all schmucks and liars in Congress, it's worse than I thought, that could, get you to do something that you weren't going to do until you heard that. because that's pretty bad. Is it really that corrupt? I mean, that's really pretty bad, right? And we're tolerating it. That's the thing. We're tolerating it as a mass of humanity. We are tolerating the situation, just like you could say the Germans tolerated Hitler, and it partly because the war was elsewhere. The fight was somewhere else. The scapegoats were not themselves, and so on. And I think we're tolerating an awful lot of dangerous stuff now. So it's very dangerous. I mean, when you're talking about World War III, that's the end. And if we can't speak out about, if we can't find some way to object, instead of just going off, keep smiling and be positive, which is just sort of the California dream, then we're just being sheep, really.
Well, here's one thing we might be able to do, and I'm going to go to Mike next, is, we could be writing letters to the editor of the New York Times, our local newspaper, any newspapers we can think of, and online to push for negotiations. We can get this idea out in the media, because they're not doing it at all. And I think through letters, it's a possibility. People who have Substack articles, there's another place. But that's one thing we could do to help get that idea of negotiations in people's minds. Right now, it is not in their minds at all. So, Mike.
One of the scary things to me, is what you just said, that it's up to me, it's up to you, it's up to us. So that's a little scary. But I'm trying to look at it through his perspective. I don't look at him as a regular average Joe. He's bright, he's brilliant, I guess. He's passionate, he's kind, he's got a lot of good in him. 16 years he's in Congress. Can you imagine serving in Congress for 16 years, going through everything he's gone through? So to come out of that, he sees all this stuff. He just sees it firsthand every single day for 16 years. So I would imagine that would make you a little bit, what's the word? I don't know, just pissed off, really upset. He really sees it. And these kind of people that are in there, and he must have been despised in there by many people. I can only imagine he was hated by a lot of people.
Well, they
and loved by a lot
marginalize
of people.
people like him.
And look, what's that?
They marginalize people like Dennis.
That's right. So, I'm just saying, that's, to me, it's scary that firsthand he's in there fighting this, passionately speaking about this, like he said 380 times, whatever he said, over 16 years. And now what? He's just really angry today. I don't know. No. Okay.
Well, it's a justifiable anger.
Yes.
Julie?
Yes.
Julie? Well, I don't know where she went. Okay, I'm going to go to Lori.
So, Mike, I like what you say, because 16 years and his time that he served was a very different country. And he did shape a lot of what is the future that we have already gone through. But there are not people that followed him in his footsteps that actually, well, I shouldn't say there are not. There are some, but are their voices actually being heard or adopted by current political parties? And that, to me, I think is really important. You can have a certain time that you serve office and you definitely go ahead and make a difference. But there are things that are left undone, and people don't necessarily pick up your tangents and move on with them. And so you have to be able to, have a movement or other voices in which to continue that. And he does sound very angry today, but there are many people that are very angry today. And I think he does go ahead and express that voice, whether this is my voice or, 10% of my voice that I hear in him that I can identify with, I think is up to the individual. But he makes you think. And that is what at least it makes you think. It makes an argument, whether you agree with him or not. The fact is that he's making you think. And that's what I got out of today.
Hey, Julie, you're back. Julie? I keep seeing her hand go up. and then-
Can you hear me, Georgia?
Yes, we can.
I would like to bring up the word draft. I didn't hear that mentioned today, and I think that was a big issue in Vietnam.
Mhm.
And I don't know what the status is, but it's something worth thinking about. Thank you.
There will be no draft. I mean, I think this is one of the things, the powers that be learned out of Vietnam, no more draft.
Exactly.
Because
Yeah.
that gets the masses really excited and into the streets. So that's one of the lessons they learned. They'll never have a draft again. I mean, there are certain things I think they learned. That's one. And another is after they lied about getting us into the Iraq War and all the assassinations that have come to light in Latin America and other countries that we've overthrown their governments, it's really hard for us to invade a country now and get people behind it. So proxy wars, perfect way to get people behind US military. And that's what we're in Ukraine. We're in a proxy war. So perfectly aligned to get even a lot of Democrats supporting that war. I mean, it's been a brilliant thing strategically, what they have learned, how to sell a war to the American people, even progressives. So I think that's kind of what we're up against. I know somebody wanted to.
Yeah.
Why did you want to say anything, Stephanie?
Just muttering to myself, but you know what, claiming the moral high ground has been the tactic with this, and it was easy because they laid it in place for decades that Russia was the bad guy, and so it's a setup. It's been set up, and people have fallen for it, and they keep pumping it up so that, you know, even blowing up a pipeline, which is pretty clear we did that, you know, it just goes away. And what about the documents now that show that Ukraine is not winning the war and that we've been lied to in a number of other ways? It'll go away. You know, they just get up there and say, Biden said, oh, there's nothing of interest there. And, you know, that's all it takes. So it's sad, really.
Yeah, it is. I might even
One of the things that pops into my mind is, you know, his focus on like starting by finding peace in your heart. I find that concept very difficult. When I think about that, you know, peace for me is similar to what Linda was saying, where, you know, people are focusing on, you know, being able to have the next meal, being able to get health care, you know, the very basic kind of survival things. And for me, then peace is, you know, being comfortable enough and be left alone by all the, you know, the tragedies in the world, you know, just it becomes kind of an isolationist view, but it's also self-protective. So I that's when I think about it, that's sort of how it lands on me.
interesting. Yeah.
Not what he means by peace, I think.
Well, I recognize that. I'm
It's
my way
not
of
creature
saying-
comforts. It's,
No,
you
I
know,
don't
a
mean
quiet
that. I
evening at
mean that-
home. Yeah.
that for me, peace is being able to, you know, to be safe in my world, which is a very limited space. And so getting beyond that to some sort of, you know, global anchor of a feeling of peace, it's a concept that eludes me.
Indeed.
Well, if we weren't so comfortable, it wouldn't elude you because we'd all be angry and we'd be in the streets. I mean, that's the thing. When people are hungry, when people are uncomfortable, you know, notice that we're still pretty comfortable. That's also a tactic. You got to keep Americans comfortable as well as lie to them. You know, just keep it all like mush, mush, mush. It's all okay.
Bread and circuses. It's all the bread. Ned, I was wanting to call on you, so I'm glad you put your hand up.
Yeah, I am perplexed. I appreciate all the thoughts people have shared here. I worked into this through a weird way, going to school at Berkeley and rabble-rouser and all that, and then the draft someone mentioned. So I ended up being in the Navy for 4 years. but they wanted to keep me, but I didn't want to be involved in another fake war. So I got out, and there was another fake war. And since then, I've done some work in Ukraine, actually, for fabulous people there. And so I have some feeling for this, but I just, boy, what a tough pickle we're in, because Putin he's thrown all in on this, trying to create, bring back the Soviet or the Russian Empire. He's not going to back down, I don't think. And the scary part is China and Taiwan sitting there. So where is the leverage to turn this? And Stephanie mentioned, or someone mentioned, Linda, I guess, about climate. So is there some leverage there? Because Russia's stuck now without, well, they're selling oil elsewhere now, but I don't, there's got to be some clever move here to bring things back together, because in the climate, we have to work with we can't get out of that without the understanding of the things that we heard about today, that everything is interconnected. We have to take care of all of life. We can't just take care of our own, or it just won't work, because we've lost respect for the earth that we came from. So I can see building from that to come together, but boy, the positions are so isolated and difficult to move in. I'm sorry, I'm not much help right now.
I'm going to challenge one thing you said, Ned, because I don't see any evidence, and if you do know of any, tell me, please, that Putin is trying to reconstruct an empire for Russia.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why I'm saying that is something I said earlier, is the US has 800 military bases stationed around the world, plus NATO troops stationed all over the place. Yeah. Russia has 30 military bases in other countries, 30 versus 800. So I don't see any evidence that they're doing anything more than wanting to get Donbass and Crimea, which are primarily Russian, back into Russia. I don't see any evidence that they're doing more than that, or aspiring to do more than that. So if anyone here has any evidence, I'd like to hear it. I really would. No?
Well, if I can, I'm sorry, I can't remember the guy's name. You'd all know him. He's written several books on the coming fascism. And he's really bright. He was so clear last night. And of course, our media is right behind his way of thinking that Ukraine is the last ditch effort to save democracy. And for,
No.
I'm not saying
that's
he's right.
bullshit.
I'm not saying he's right, Georgia. I'm simply saying that is what we're up against.
Yes.
That is the common idea right now. And so no one cares about climate or anything else, because right now, it's saving democracy and it's preventing Russia from attacking, I guess, Eastern countries, and continuing just like Hitler did when when we allowed him some leeway. That's a part of history that's really going to be hard to get over.
Well, I don't think it's the history so much as the propaganda we're getting. That's the real issue here. I'm going to go to Fran because she hasn't spoken yet. Fran?
Yeah, I want to bring this back to the issue of China.
Good.
Because the thing that Dennis said that was so striking is that we are very good at creating enemies. And we are so systematically today, this year, last year, setting up China as our enemy.
Yep.
We are systematically doing that, and we don't need to do that. And now, people are talking about World War III, which is really the end. And anything we can do to tamp down that very strong message that China is our enemy, we are in competition for global control, and we must in some way suppress China. If we're going to solve our problems, somehow the United States and China need to come together. And setting them up as the next big enemy, bigger than Russia, is, I think, something that we can do something about because it's still in somewhat early stage. Yeah.
That's a really good point. And we didn't really get into China yet, but I think we do see that creation of an enemy happening with China.
Mhm.
And part of it is over because of Taiwan. And this is something I didn't know, but John, who I think is no longer on the call right now, who is our younger techie, who's been getting us into some books in our book club that we might not have otherwise read. One of them is called Chip Wars. I haven't read it yet except the first few pages, but it is about the kind of minerals and metals that Taiwan has and the kind of manufacturing they're doing.
Mm.
It's really being done nowhere else to the scale of what it is being done in Taiwan. And we're getting all this material from them. So the thought of China taking it over is just horrifying, I guess, to our business and our government. So this is another piece that we're not being told about China and why Taiwan has become so important to the US. So that's just something else. I'm wanting to get into that book, but there's so much to read. Stephanie, you wanted to say something?
Well, if you read John Perkins' book, he talks about China, and it is a threat from the perspective of, the merchants of our society, because China has made good connections all over the world. And where we went in with our hitmen and, we're very destructive and mean, China has a different approach, and it's been very effective. So we're scared that China is going to take over the marketplace. So it's pretty childish, and stupid to pick on Taiwan and aggravate the vulnerable wound of China, as well as if it has all these minerals. Ukraine has a lot of wonderful minerals that we need, and Afghanistan has a lot of precious stones. And I mean, there is wealth that these countries have. So it's certainly a factor. The thing is, we go kill in order to get it. That's what's so horrible. And China is not doing that. So the idea that China is a threat to us in that way is not correct. It's just completely made up. The threat is in the marketplace.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I interviewed John Perkins on Monday, and probably some of you were on that call. And he does talk a lot about China in his third edition that just came out this year, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And he kind of points out that China has a very different approach. Their hitmen have a very different approach. They have more of the carrot than the stick, where the US had more of the stick than the carrot, because they promise trade with their country and they won't interfere with their government. So things like that we would never have said. So anyway, I think that book is very interesting in terms of what's being set up with China. So David, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up here on what Fran said. John Perkins lives here on Bainbridge, and we have lunch together every Wednesday. So we discussed this at great length. And, Fran's point about if we look for where we can make a positive difference, the perhaps greatest opportunity of all is the possibility of focusing attention on the opportunity. Well, let me change that. The thing that John and I are both coming together around is the recognition that in this struggle that we have to avoid human self-extinction through all of these different inequality, the environmental crisis, the wars, and so forth, moving out of it requires citizen action, but in terms of governments, the two critical governments are the United States and China. And the more we come at each other in conflict, the less chance there is for any human future. And if there's anything we can do to begin to shift this framework of as so many of you pointed out, the growing tension and potential warfare between the US and China, that is where attention can and should be. It is where we can make a difference. And this is the moment.
So what would you want to do, Dave, to change that?
Get it into the discussion is the first thing. I mean, and the first thing is in the discussion with one another.
Like we're doing now.
Yeah, exactly.
We need this conversation happening at every level, because until we really get it, that they're all of these issues, they're all linked together. And he really did give us the message. It starts with our thinking. And if our thinking isn't that we're all interconnected and that all these issues are leading us into the same direction, there's nothing we can do.
Oh, there's one thing I want to mention because
That's so good.
It came up in the Stanford group that I'm in. There's a film that's been made by David Talbot's brother, Stephen Talbot, called The Movement and the Madman, which was about, it's worth looking at. It's, if I can get the link, I'll put it into the chat box. It basically tells the story of the Vietnam War from the point of view of how the movement actually did change the outcome of the war. And what he maintains in the film is that, yes, he didn't really go into the early groups that were opposed to the war, like SDS and peace groups, but he focused more on when the mass of people started getting aware of what was going on in Vietnam and started opposing it. That when it really got into more of the mainstream opposition, that then the demonstrations were massive. I mean, millions of people showed up in DC and all over the country. And at that point, he maintains that Kissinger and Nixon were really primed to use nuclear war or nuclear armaments on in the Vietnam War. But because of this massive outpouring of dissent, that they didn't feel they could get by with it, and it actually kept the war from escalating in a way that it might have otherwise done. Who knows if that's true or not, but that's the point he makes in the film. The more important part is that as people got educated, masses of people came out and demonstrated. I think that was probably.
I just wanted to say one thing. I thought Dennis was so eloquent and inspiring, and I'm sorry my computer went down with the power outage. But I love this piece. I'm glad it got back on the call because that's right. The question here is great, David. What can we do? And I'm, of course, very pleased that we're talking about more conversations. I thought Dennis had a real strength in his ability to inspire unity. But I've been thinking a lot about how I see in my psychotherapy practice, how change happens in conflict. It's not just inspiring unification. People want to be happy in their homes, but they really have to dig down into the actual problems and understand them. So I think the other message that somehow has to get transferred out there is, what is the diagnosis in all of us? What is the problem with as Brene Brown calls it, the ego is a gangster. We all have it. We're all going to get mad when somebody cuts in front of us in the grocery line. It's got to be a deeper diagnosis, I think, too.
Such a vivid sign, Katie, when someone cuts in front of us in the grocery line. Yeah, we have that immediate response.
Murder.
Georgia, one thing that struck me with what you were just saying is during the Vietnam War, there was much more really revelatory covering of what was actually happening there than there's been since then. And I think the powers that be learned from that. And it's much harder now for us to get a realistic picture of what's going on in these wars.
And there's no Walter Cronkite.
And the draft.
Yeah, all those things that helped educate people, they got rid of. It's like they're smart, and I was saying this to the Stanford group. When I worked at Stanford Research Institute, you see all these proposals and scenarios of things that could happen, and you realize they have think tanks, and they're really thinking all the time of how to sell these wars, how to kind of manipulate consciousness. They're expert at this. We don't spend all this time, figuring out the solutions, but believe me, they do spend the time and the money, and they have the think tanks, all the stuff we don't have.
Well, that actually goes to a point I was going to make, thinking about, how the Pentagon has, goes through what they call scenario planning for kind of contingencies that the think tanks come up with. And one of those that's been around since the George W. administration was regarding climate change. What are they looking at in terms of response when things go really bad? And my contention is we've got a perfect example of that in Syria. They had a drought that concentrated people in cities. The cities blew up, and then they had a civil war. I mean, there's a climate-driven scenario that's, in the textbooks, it should be already. So that suggests the power of negotiation, which was a theme in the talk today. And I think, maybe Ned can weigh in on this, that the work that's required to respond to climate change is a point of unification. The technological skill of China, for example, and the two essential powers looking at that aspect and coming to some solid mutual agreements on that could really dampen down the kind of tensions everyone's concerned about, and could then be an inroad to the kind of change that I think we're all seeking here. So, maybe Ned, with your work on climate, do you see that kind of influence taking hold in any of these negotiations?
Well, I think there's I think that's good, Ray. A lot of possibility there. Amory Lovins has done a lot of work with China, and they've responded like crazy. Electric trains all over the place. And so now we've got to get the coal out. We buy all our materials from there. So much of our goods and services are coming from there. In the United States, our emissions 5 times more than the per capita than the world average is mostly connected with the goods and services we buy. So we've got to help other, the manufacturing centers lower their emissions, or we have to just get away with a lot less, which would be nice. But no, I think there's we can kind of work around the edges to work in that area, and then that possibly can provide open doors for having more productive conversations in these other areas. Because we have to work together to do the climate thing. So then
my suggestion is that necessary action then becomes a template for change.
It's a possible route. It opens a door to a different pathway than a straight on thing. You kind of come around the side.
My understanding about climate is, and I think we'll get into this more with the next Praxis event, that in addition to all the technological change, we're going to have to scale back the global economy. We cannot do that as long as we stay committed to perpetual growth.
Right.
Well, that's for sure. And with all these people, we've got 8 billion people. The Earth
I think we've talked about that before. I think the level of consumption and travel and all that is really more critical than the population. And the fact that the US has such a much higher per capita emissions than any other country. And it's the industrial countries that are the major contributors. So I think that's the real point of focus, even more than population, although, educating women and all that is also certainly something we should support.
And we just can't have people in the US having lots of children because we are the ones that use the most. And
Yeah, but
contribute
I
to
mean,
emissions.
the educated people don't have more children.
Right, but not everyone is in that arena.
That's true.
But yeah, it's a good point. Stephanie, you had your pause.
Thanks. I wanted to go back to, I've been trying to find a way to just let you all know who are talking about Ukraine and the need for negotiations, that Peace in Ukraine is a coalition that was started by Code Pink, and they have their own website, peaceinukraine.org. And they have a letter that they're buying a full page ad in the, I don't know, the Times maybe, demanding negotiations. You can sign that. And so if you're looking for ways to do something toward getting a negotiated peace in Ukraine, which right now looks just about impossible, nevertheless, the more those voices are heard, that is something, that's something we can be, is one of those voices. So peaceinukraine.org.
Okay, I'll put that too. Yeah, Medea Benjamin, who wrote a really good book on this, was our speaker, our last live speaker in Sonoma in November. And her book, which she co-wrote with, and I forgot his name, but it's an excellent small book on the war in Ukraine and the history that led up to it all. So peaceinukraine.org, is that correct, Stephanie?
Yeah, Peace in Ukraine, yeah.
All right, anyone else? This has been a good discussion. Linda?
Just one question to David Corton, because I keep thinking, I don't know if he's still with us, but
Yeah, he is.
I keep thinking your next book needs to answer, well, what happens after corporations have taken over the world? I mean, to me, that is the problem. If you follow the money behind the world war, whatever we're doing right now, the wars we could go in, the chip war. I mean, if you really look at the pressures that we're facing right now, it's all a global takeover of the world. So how do we regulate the corporations that are causing all of this? I wish you had the answer because you woke us up.
Right.
Well, if you follow what I've been doing, including the conversations we've had with Georgia, I've been focused on that for actually decades in terms of what is the alternative. And the general framing that I work on currently is the recognition that it requires a civilizational transformation.
Yeah.
I mean,
what's one step towards that from your perspective?
Well, the first step is in fact in the human mind. I mean, that's the only thing that gives me any hope, that the problem is in the human mind. It is our fixation on money as the driver of progress and wealth and everything else. And just coming to recognize that money's nothing but a fucking number. I mean, it's just, it
Wow.
no intrinsic value or worth or utility other than the way it shapes our mind. But the living wealth, the living world is the dynamic of life and the recognition. We talk about everything as interdependent. That's a kind of a simplistic view, but the frame of Ubuntu, I am because you are, begins to tap into the scientific recognition of, starting right with our bodies, that we're each a composite of tens of trillions of individual living cells. And that's kind of a metaphor for the way Earth organizes to create and maintain the conditions that are distinctive to this particular planet and all the planets in the cosmos. And that begins to give us a totally different framework for thinking about how we relate to one another and Earth. And that's what we got to do. And it's a future defined first of all by peace. I mean, the most absurd way to waste our resources is warfare. Of all the absurd ways to use our resources, that is the one that takes it all.
Yep.
But the next one is recognizing the need for radical equality around material sufficiency and spiritual abundance. And all of this has to be around a framework that there are no winners on a dead earth. We are killing Earth. And if everything else we do, the absolute first priority has to be the health and well-being of Earth, to maintain the conditions that are essential to our existence, continued existence. And somehow we've got to, it's my view, we've got to get that basic image across, and then start having really serious conversations. Not about how we stop this war or that war, but how do we get beyond the whole concept of war? It's a human institution.
Well, it's kind of an economic driver of our, it is the economic driver of our society in this country.
It is.
That's the
one of them. It's
Yeah, it's a real serious problem. If all of a sudden we got rid of this whole war machine, what would happen? All the jobs that are associated with it could be funneled into renewable energy, but
exactly, and into the recovery of our living systems and everything else.
Yeah.
It's.
I think we should stop the war in Ukraine first before we take on changing the whole mindset of every human
Well, that could
being.
be part of it. Stopping a war can be changing the mindset at the same time.
Right, but talk about something that's really big. What David is saying is really big and is going to take a while. And I think we're in that process because we're talking about these things, at least some of us, and it's happening that we have that understanding, but we still have these wars. So
Also have kindness instead.
Have
See
what?
what that does.
Kindness, yeah.
Yeah.
Not get mad at that person who gets ahead of us in the grocery line.
Well, it's fascinating because I like that concept of kindness, and what is kindness rooted in? It's rooted in kind of a cooperation that finds mutual benefit, just in that emotional connection. But that's also true when you model an ecology. You have the fungus growing, and it's helping to transport minerals in exchange for sugars at the root zone. And so there's this beneficial cooperation that enhances both species and creates what Bucky Fuller referred to as the livingry of the earth. So I'm thinking maybe what we need is the kind of myth building and story that indigenous folks really kind of bridge that larger sense of the world, and perhaps bring back a some sort of a religion of Gaia, where that basic interconnection and mutual support, the cooperation that even Darwin found, much more so than his the concept we seem to walk away with, which is the fighting that is somehow required. It's really not that at all. So that to me is the model. That could also be a model for an economy. That kind of mutual benefit exchange at a truly ecological value level. And of course, my interest comes down to looking at that for carbon as being the basis of life. Why not have an economy that's based on abundance, the most abundant item out there, versus something that's rare, gold, silver, whatever, and somehow making the rare, the hard to get at, the thing you have to fight for, having more value. It's quite the opposite in the function of nature. So I just think there's some biomimicry modeling that could go on in the story and myth zone that could really help us as a species, make those connections and feel them deeply.
I think that's a
Yes.
very powerful piece to this, it's all about narrative and changing, as you mentioned, David, it starts with thought and how we project and demonize. I just find myself going back, remember months ago, Georgia, I keep thinking about models of actual change, and I keep thinking about the way they put that slogan on the side of cigarette packs. This could be dangerous to your health. So I keep thinking if we could find a slogan and get some rich lawyer, I guess that's how they did it, to stick that on all kinds of whatever candy bars or something. There's got to be a way to get, whether it's respect each other, not conflict, or, I mean, it would have to be short and sweet, but the brain has to change radically. Conflict is extremely adrenaline producing. We're addicted to it.
There are other ways to get an adrenaline rush, but yeah, we are addicted.
Yeah,
I know we've been
one
going
of
almost for 2 hours, but one thing I do want to bring up, because I met with Ned the other day, and John Crowley, who owns the Aquas Cafe in Petaluma, and they're involved in Cool Petaluma, which is an incredible program for organizing really almost the entire city. So that's something we're going to have a program on that eventually.
Great.
And I love what they're doing over there already. And I'm bringing in a cooperative component to them. And actually, we're going to set up that meeting in the next couple of weeks. So this is something that is ongoing on a local level that is meant to change the culture in a city.
Georgia, John, the guy that owns Aquas Cafe there, he is interested in having a partner to do it also here in Sonoma.
It's going to be harder to do in Sonoma.
I know.
I mean, I'm going to try and get him to get with a couple of council people from Petaluma, with at least 1 or 2 council people from Sonoma to talk about it. But Sonoma's changed a lot. I think it would have been easier to have done here 10 years ago than it is now.
I know.
But
I know.
give up.
Yeah, don't give up. Hold the hope.
Give up. Won't move to Petaluma yet.
Okay.
Maybe.
One quick idea,
Go ahead.
but it just occurs to me out of this conversation that if we just got across one idea, in our current situation, war is stupid. We've spent so much time arguing about the details of individual wars and what justifies what and what the good and the bad and all that stuff is. But the really bigger story, the bigger message is war in our current human situation is absolutely stupid.
That's good. It's a good point.
And you could even say conflict and war, so you won't break into the grocery line.
Boy, that one.
Let's keep it simple. War is stupid. I love it. Yeah, it could go on your cigarette pack.
It is good.
Right. That goes on the package. This is your brain on war.
We could put that on the beer package. How about? Six-pack.
Eggs in the
Message
pan.
on the 6-pack. That's the place to put it.
Yeah.
War is stupid.
War
War
could be
and-
dangerous to your health. War could be
How
dangerous.
about war and perpetual growth are stupid? Or-
Well, you're getting complicated now.
Bad. Both bad.
Let's tackle one thing at a time. If we could get rid of war, we'd really be able to solve everything.
Well, you could do more than one ad and then keep it simple in each one.
Right.
Maybe on coffee cups. Maybe Starbucks would do it or something.
Don't forget Starbucks.
Starbucks needs to do something good. They're in so much hot
That's what I
water.
mean.
They all need to do something good, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
That should be our approach. Wouldn't you like to improve your image? It really
Yes.
is very dirty right
Totally,
now.
Totally. I mean,
was-
it's
Or
a
the
great
simple-
great
Let's
idea.
just stop for a moment. I'm going to stop the recording. So I'm
Okay.
gonna have it quiet while I do that. But I want to thank everybody for being on this call today. We've been on 2 hours.
It's great.
We've
It was
really
great.
gotten into it, which is what I wanted to have happen. And next week, we're going to actually, I think, take off from this with Paul Hawken.
Yeah.
That's going to be a really critical conversation. And his book, Regeneration, is excellent because you know what? David, it's got solutions in it. It has real solutions in it that are happening right now.
Yeah.
But we don't read about them. It's like we
No.
don't hear about this stuff.
No.
And this is part of the problem. It's like we need our own media.
Yeah,
Yeah, that would be good.
yeah.
Well, that, those,
Practice